What if the next revolution in computing isn't about faster phones or bigger screens, but reimagining how humans and technology interact completely?
I kind of somehow wonder if there will be a point in 10 years' time where actually people with perfect vision will just be opting to glasses on because it helps them so much.
That's Dave Haynes, co-founder of FOV Ventures, a specialized VC firm betting on Europe's founders who are redefining our computing future. Dave sees limitations in how we currently engage with technology.
At the moment, most of the work we do, the work is kind of disintermediated between these like 2D screens. So it's very much like text in, text out.
But the boundary between digital and physical worlds is dissolving, creating unprecedented investment opportunity.
We're now moving towards this like ChatGPT moment for robotics, where robots have trained or kind of generalized models in order to take action in the real world.
Yet for years, European founders with breakthrough ideas faced a critical problem.
But Europe really didn't have like a go-to, like those founders were getting on a plane and going to kind of San Francisco, or they were just having to do a lot to kind of convince that like, hey, I'm slightly different.
That's where FOV Ventures stepped in, with a thesis built on identifying the right ideas at precisely the right moment.
3 or 4 years ago, there was a company called Robotics that got started there. Amazing, technically talented team out of Cambridge, making components for AR glasses, right? And they had investment from FOV Ventures. That's now sold for 500 million to Snap.
The opportunity spans across the continent.
It's Europe-wide, but I would say those are the places that we've mostly invested in. Is kind of, I haven't talked about UK yet. You have some amazing talent in UK, obviously. But yeah, UK, Finland, Germany, France, and the Nordic countries as well, John.
Join us for a deep dive with Dave Haynes of FOV Ventures as we explore how the merger of AI, spatial computing, and robotics is creating a new era where digital and physical worlds converge, and why Europe is poised to lead it.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. Discover where operational expertise meets innovation. With end-to-end coverage across fund admin, tax, accounting, compliance, ESG, and more, we take care of the complexities so you can focus on what matters most. Whether it's supporting visionaries or maximizing returns for your LPs, our tech-driven and comprehensive solutions empower you to achieve your goals with confidence. Partner with ACE Alternatives to streamline your operations and elevate your fund success.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today I have Dave Haynes with me, and Dave was so kind to say, I'm a bit nervous, man. And then I made that all go away by fucking everything up on the tech side. So now we're finally underway. Dave, let's talk about FOV Ventures. Tell us all about yourself and the firm.
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. I feel like I've listened to a lot of EUVC podcasts. So I know the standard is high. Hopefully this will be an intriguing conversation. Yeah, so FOV Ventures, we've been going, we had our third birthday a couple of weeks ago. We invest in the next era of computing. So it's myself and my partner. I'm based in London. My partner Petri's based in Helsinki. And what do we mean by investing in the next era of computing? Really, that's any kind of field that founders building at the intersection of AI, spatial computing, 3D, gaming tech, and kind of related areas, including robotics. We love investing in founders like in Europe from day zero, and we kind of specialize in this. So we're happy to get conviction around great ambitious founders from that early stage.
And we're going to talk a bunch about investing day zero, also the geo of Europe and how you think about doing that, the risks associated to your specific strategy, and much, much more. Of course, also specialist versus generalist. We're going to pitch into that debate because that's obviously, with such a specialist thesis as you have, something that's important to you. But let's start with your thesis. Expand it a little bit because yes, computing, robotics, but what does it really mean for you?
Yeah, so I think for us, if you think about it, we've had all these different eras of computing, right? And this is, well, one, this won't be new to anyone, but we had, the era of mainframes. That meant a certain thing for compute. Then the hardware changed. We then had PCs, we moved to laptops, we moved to mobile, we moved to Web 2, and there's been these distinct phases, and it's usually like maybe 10 to 15 years where a few things fundamentally shift. So the hardware fundamentally shifts, the connectivity fundamentally shifts, but also the kind of software and applications and use cases that are built then also fundamentally shift. And I think where we are now, we're kind of just coming out of the end of the kind of mobile era, also the kind of cloud era, and we're moving into this very different time. Like we're only seeing glimpses of it now, but I think the way that humans interact with computers is just going to vastly change beyond recognition. And how do we think that's going to happen? Well, first of all, the hardware is changing. Like mobile phones aren't going away anytime soon, but like we do have different types of devices. So we have AR glasses, we have VR headsets, we have kind of intelligent wearables, we have things like robotics. So there is a kind of a new surface area of devices upon which compute can be done. Second of all, those devices are just getting a lot more intelligent. At the moment, most of the work we do, whether it's kind of, work or play or, anything we do in industrial setting, the work is kind of disintermediated between these like 2D screens. So it's very much like text in, text out. We're surfing the internet, making documents with kind of words and pictures and sometimes video. But I think the content that we're going to be producing is just much more intelligent, way more interactive. And actually, if you think about it, becoming more 3D and putting all of those applications into the real world around us as well.
You got to unpack it further. Because, tell me, to what extent do you think about it from a technology standpoint versus how we interface / use? It's a bit different, I think, whether you're thinking about computing is going to change in terms of we've gone from floppy disks to more digital. We've gone from now we have a next level Microsoft chip as well. That's, I don't understand shit, but they've come up with a completely new not element, but you know what I mean. It's not liquid state, neither is it gas, neither is it
quantum step.
Yes. Tell me, so what drives you here? Is it this UI shift, or is it the shift in the application layer, or is it the shift in the underlying technology? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can take those one by one, right? So we are definitely, there is a number of technologies that have been emerging for, over the past 5-10 years, or maybe we're even on the kind of second or third cycles of them. So, the first of which, it's fairly obvious, but artificial intelligence. So AI has just, really kind of in the last few years turned a corner where it's getting much more powerful, especially with things like LLMs, right? So now AI can, pass a certain test, or it can do very well, like kind of, if I ask it a question or put a prompt in, it can give me text out. We've slowly increased that capability. So most of those models are now multimodal, right? So I could put an image in and get text out, or get a text out, and vice versa. We've also got audio models. We have a company called AI Acoustics that has an audio model for cleaning up audio. You also have things like 11 Labs. So we're also now kind of interacting with our computers much more via voice. We're also getting video models, which is super interesting because there's a lot of stuff that you can do around that. But actually, if you think about one thing we're really excited about is actually, if you go on to ChatGPT and you say, hey, describe how, if I've got a piece of paper in front of me, like if I ask ChatGPT, how is this piece of paper going to fall? It would try and describe it, but it wouldn't just know how to do that because it's just, it doesn't have understanding of the world around us and the kind of physics that are underlying that. So we're now moving into this world where we have these kind of world models and then physical AI, which, goes on to areas like robotics. And we can talk about that in much more detail later on. So that's one area, just like everything that we're doing is just getting way more intelligent. And that goes beyond just kind of like 2D text and images. The second thing that we then have is the kind of category that we would call spatial computing. So again, like if you think about most of the software that you use, you're using Excel, you're using Google, you're using the 10th SaaS product. Again, that is all just, we're working like in the abstract, we're working with like 2D screens, boxes and buttons. But actually the real world around us, like that's in 3D. Like I'm sat here, I've got physical objects. If I want to shop for something, then I could see a 2D photo of it, but wouldn't it be great if I could just kind of like visualize it in front of me, like in 3D? Or if I was at a construction site, wouldn't it be better if I could review the plans, as they were kind of as a digital twin rather than just like 2D drawings, right? So that's the kind of the next capability, just having much richer kind of 3D applications that can kind of simulate the world around us. What's really interesting is I could do that on my phone, or I could do that 3D work on a 2D screen, but we're also now, with kind of advancements in hardware, we're now seeing very accessible VR headsets. And we're also kind of just on the tip of also having very capable AR headsets. Maybe that's going to be 5 years time, but there's certainly a roadmap for that within many of the big tech companies.
And tell me just, Dave, because when we first got to know you, this was very much a big piece in your thesis, this spatial computing, metaverse, meta world. I think this is super important to bring out in this podcast, right? How does a VC firm like yours go from one place where you're very focused to saying, nah, there's actually a bigger, wider space where we think we should be playing?
It's super interesting. When we went out, we're currently out talking about Fund 2, but when we were raising Fund 1, we talked a lot about spatial computing. And I think that the challenges with this industry, especially when you're kind of working with these more frontier technologies, both the founder community and the VC community and the analysts, like we tend to get stuck into the buzzwords du jour, right? It's like, if you think about when we all talked about the internet back in the 90s, people were talking about the information superhighway, and lots of people came and said, oh, that means we'll get TV direct to here. Other people said, oh, this will change the way we research science. And, everyone knew that this information superhighway was coming, but it kind of, many people sort of like took out of it what they wanted. Now we now know the information superhighway is just the internet, and it's been a huge, value driver, and it's disrupted many, many different industries. So in Fund 1, when we were talking about something like the metaverse, I feel like it was kind of that. It's like it was a term for its age, but for us, it really represented this next paradigm shift. I would say when you think about the metaverse, for most people, I think the way the media perceived it, and because companies like Meta came out and owned the term, I think that became much more about virtual worlds. Whereas I think what we get really excited about is how the next era of computing is really where the physical blends with the digital world. So yes, I could fully simulate that kind of construction yard and, do some planning or do some, fear of heights training or something like that. But actually, if I'm on that construction yard and I've got digital information coexisting with the actual physical building, or I'm able to understand it and set a robot to kind of automate building one of the walls, then that becomes really powerful. So I think maybe what people missed about the metaverse was all of the same technologies that were kind of, this shift in the way that we were kind of experiencing applications and building virtual worlds. Actually, all of that extends into real world applications where kind of the world of bits starts to smash with the world of atoms. I think, it's famous, Mark Andreessen is famous for saying kind of software is eating the world. And we kind of think about the world is blending with software, the digital is really kind of starting to merge with the physical.
And Mark, of course, since has been gotten known for saying many other things as well. Constant source of great one-liners. I want to ask you, so you're saying, we have the AI layer, and then we have the spatial computing or AI layer, the AI being a driver of this next level computing. Then we have spatial computing. What other elements are we missing here? Then we have computing in the form of robotics, which I guess is one in its own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one other area to point out is that, all of these kind of new applications, whether it's AI or spatial computing, it is requiring more hardware. It's requiring more compute power. Kind of importantly, it's also requiring just more networking and connectivity, right? So certainly as we kind of we're still early in this kind of 20-year cycle. So actually as FOV, it's been as much about investing into the kind of the tools and infrastructure layer, which is literally we may have invested in a optics company, or we have a company called Flow Computing that is accelerating CPUs to be able to do kind of greater workloads. So we've invested in that kind of infrastructure layer. Then you think about it, you also then have the kind of picks and shovels. So if you're going to build all of these rich applications, what are the tools that if you're going to build a 3D virtual world, that's much harder than building a standard kind of B2B SaaS application. So what are the sort of the tools of tomorrow. People are building 3D worlds on top of game engines today, like Unity and Unreal, and that's powering like huge amount of software beyond games. But in order to get these like full simulations with which we can really create that value at scale, creators and developers are going to need more tools. So yeah, we've really, in these early innings, we've also looked at those areas. And I think one thing that maybe some people miss is like, okay, it's not about just, okay, we have these new technologies. It's really about the convergence of all these technologies, right? So if you think about like, we've invested in Fund One heavily around kind of like 3D and like game engines. Now you might say, well, hang on, well, what's the link between like 3D and VR and like game engines and robotics? And actually think about the example where, okay, in order to understand, like today, robotics, it, is very much kind of on rails. It's very kind of complex task, but it's very programmed, right? And we're now moving towards this like ChatGPT moment for robotics, where actually those robots have trained or kind of generalized models in order to take action in the real world. But how do you actually get the training data for those models? Like, yes, you could take a bunch of video from the real world, but actually people like NVIDIA are building projects like Cosmos, where they're synthetically generating video in 3D engines and then using that to train the data. And then actually, if I think about it, now I've got that like robot out in the real world, AI probably isn't still like being able to allow it to do everything. So you're still having to fall back on things like teleoperation. And that's where something like VR comes in. Like we've spoken to a number of companies and have one in our portfolio who are thinking about like, once I have my robot out in the field, well, I may need to fall back to a human operator who is in some form of kind of like VR or kind of AR setup in order to experience what the robot is thinking. And you just can't do that on a 2D screen. If I'm going into a nuclear site to, do something that's very high risk, some kind of dirty or dangerous task, you don't want to risk your operator having to kind of like be in 2D and not understand that like the depth perception of where the task that I'm doing is. So we're really excited. And what we've seen is just this kind of acceleration and the convergence of these technologies. And it's really kind of at the center of all those, which is the sweet spot for FOV.
Yeah. When I think about specialist VCs, I am always like, I'm digging into understanding exactly what are you seeing technology-wise, society-wise, basically what I call almost inflection. So what are the things that are happening that are lining up perfectly to make the sector, the vertical, the technologies you're focusing on be perfectly timed right now? But that's the one side to a thesis. There's the other side, which is how does it align with the firm? And that to me is just as important. You might be focusing on this, but if you have no credibility, no empathy for the founders building in that space, that's going to be super difficult. So I'd love to ask you, how does this side of the equation look like? So how does you and your partner and the whole team at FOV, how do you, so to say, match up against this thesis?
Yeah, and I should say just on the specialist thing, it's interesting because like we think of ourselves as a specialist fund in that we have a very clear thesis, which kind of rules out maybe 80% of all of the other deal flow that we could be looking at. When we see a deal, it's like, right, this is in thesis. We can go very deep. We see how all those things relate to each other. But it's funny because I've spoken to other GPs and some LPs where they say, but hang on, this doesn't look specialist because you're talking about, on the one hand, like, the game industry. On the other hand, you're talking about construction, and now you're talking about robotics. So, and that's probably a topic in itself, but I kind of see there's definitely some funds where you are like, right, I'm fintech focused or I'm climate focused, and you're just in those industries and sectors. Whereas it might be like, hey, I'm an AI fund or I'm a deep tech fund. And then you're probably looking at, right, we have these technologies, but what are the areas that it can be applied to now? So what we were investing in 2022 may be different to what we're investing in 2026. I think we had in our thesis that robotics was going to become more powerful because of this tech stack, but it wouldn't have been the right thing for us to invest in. Then we've had to wait for those technologies to mature. But I'll pin that to answer your original question. And yeah, I think that's another thing that, founders and VCs will always think about, this kind of founder market fit. Why are these founders uniquely placed? And I think the equivalent in VC is like a GP thesis fit, right? Why is this person doing it? I think that there's a few things there, but the simple answer is that we think this is a kind of 15 to 20 year trend. We're probably in year 5 of it being kind of investable. But actually, between Petri and I, we've actually been looking at the space for, for kind of, getting on for 7-8 years now. So so I started my career investing. I was a founding team at SoundCloud, then moved into VC in 2014, moving to Seedcamp. And I think for both AI and VR, it was still like the previous cycles of those things. The AI was still breaking out. We just had like ImageNet. We had the early reinforcement learning and machine vision. And we made a few bets around that. We also had the kind of first go around of VR when Oculus was sold to Meta. And I made a few investments there in that space, which are actually still going and doing really well today. But it was still very early. Not many other people were looking at those spaces. I actually then moved after Seedcamp. I moved to CVC, so I moved to HTC. HTC had kind of got to this kind of next era, like maybe a little bit early, maybe too early, where they'd sold their smartphone division to Google and were investing in things like VR and AR and 5G. So whilst I was there, like Petri was at an accelerator in Helsinki called Nordic Accelerators, NXS, or Nordic XR Startups. So we kind of figured that actually we're probably the only fund at that point in time. It was still early, but we had strategic reasons to be investing in those sectors. And we would just see the same deals, and we would see a lot of other VCs just not kind of wanting to kind of dive into those slightly more frontier topics. They were much more comfortable. We had the era of B2B SaaS with, playbooks that made sense for most of the VC community in Europe. And then we noticed that actually in US, you had already maybe 4 or 5 like other funds that had these kind of specialist lenses on similar topics to us. Like you had like Evernet LDV, that is a computer vision focused fund. You had people like Greg at Anorak. Greg was one of the first investors in Oculus. You had a specialist VR fund called the Venture Reality Fund that was kind of co-investing us in some of those VR companies. But Europe really didn't have like a go-to, like those founders were getting on a plane and going to kind of San Francisco, or they were just having to do a lot to kind of convince that like, hey, I'm slightly different. Like, like, do you want to give me the first check? So yeah, so although I think that's where the GP thesis fit has come in, like we've just spent all of our time looking into those areas. And I think over those years, some of these other trends have evolved, and we've kind of, I think what started off as a bit more of a narrow focus, there's definitely a kind of broader surface area that we call kind of spatial computing, or we generalize into saying, hey, this is the next era of computing. When we launched the fund when we started raising the fund in 21, I feel like most of this stuff was kind of non-consensus. It's kind of good and bad that I feel like today, some of these, I mean, VR is still a bit of a non-consensus area, but I certainly think things around like physical AI, computer vision, robotics, those are much more common sense. And now it's like, okay, well, now the rest of the world like kind of believes us too. Now it's like, as a fund, how do we kind of add value, or how do we get to those deals maybe a bit before others do?
It's funny because on that part around the market, I always describe it in venture as you almost only want to be in one quadrant of the competition matrix, right? You only want to be in the one where everything is taking off and there's a lot of players. If everything's not taking off, it's not going to be a good place. Those are not going to be great successes. But on the other hand, if everything's taking off, but there's not a lot of competition, you also don't have co-investors and follow-on investors. Yeah. So venture is this weird space where it's very hard to go outside of where the majority of the investors are, which pushes us into a competition situation at the same time. You, of course, can do it. It's just incredibly hard, and you have to have a fund model that then allows you to protect your investments in the follow-on rounds.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Fund 1 was a 20 million euro fund. It was very much like we didn't want to oversize the fund for the opportunity at that time in 2022. Obviously, that's growing because the opportunity is growing, and we proved that we can get really great deal flow in this space. But we have to be a very collaborative fund, right? So we're often kind of following in seed or kind of leading at pre-seed and being able to bring other angels and other kind of early believers. But it meant over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, we've really had to work hard to know, right, who are the specialist funds that we can collaborate with? And now there is a nice kind of number. And there's like, some of the gaming funds have been the ones that are investing more in like gaming tech. Like we've done deals with those guys. Like Andreessen Horowitz has a program called Speedrun where they do games investments, but they love things that aren't just games, but are maybe like game adjacent. Now we also have in Europe, I think there's a really kind of great pool of like deep tech VCs. So when we're thinking about the bets that we've made in optics or semiconductors or power, there's a new bunch of funds that are willing to take those slightly kind of longer term bets. And then the challenge is just going back to the earlier thing, it's like timing. So we believe in a world where in 10 years time, like AR glasses will be kind of mainstream. I actually wear the Meta Ray-Bans probably like 80% of my week. I'm not wearing them now. Maybe I should have done. We hold that belief, but then as early stage pre-seed investors, I have to make a bet on like, okay, well, is there an investable opportunity? And actually, like, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a company called Wave Optics that got started there. Amazing, technically talented team out of Cambridge, making components for AR glasses, right? And they had investment from Multimodal Ventures. That's now sold for 500 million to Snap. If I'd been investing in like AR applications, and I can name quite a few that have pitched us over the years, like those are too market dependent. Like these require like, AR glasses to be mainstream before we can invest. And it's the same with VR. Like there's certain categories, like gaming is booming. Like the amount of revenue that can be made on the Quest Store is insane. The biggest VR game was actually made by two guys in the Czech Republic, and they just made something that was very unique to the platform that ended up getting sold to Meta, and those guys are now very, much better off for it. So yeah, we just have to, I think that the trick is just understanding the timing and knowing where the kind of downstream VCs are willing to bet and who those believers are. There's no point raising money from somebody who just doesn't have conviction around this space. Just move on to the next investor.
I want to just ask you on the AR glasses, and you're obsessed with this space and really believe that this is going to change things. We now have Dave changing his glasses for this special segment. That makes a lot of sense. And Dave, I want to ask you, as a power user, using the glasses 80% of the time, I've many times thought, I'm using ChatGPT a lot. I wonder if I had it plugged in, or in this case, Claude plugged into my ear all the time, how much more would I be using it? So tell me, what is the experience?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's kind of ironic because I'm already a glasses user, right? So this is already a form factor that I have on my head every day. That means the utility I require from it is probably less than what you may need from it. Yeah. And ironically, it's like people spend a lot of money to have laser eye surgery so they don't need glasses. I kind of somehow wonder if there will be a point in 10 years time where actually people with perfect vision will just be opting to put glasses on because it helps them so much in their day-to-day lives. So yeah, I'm going to be interesting to kind of track that one. But for these, I have the for context for people who can't see the video, I have the Meta Ray-Bans on. And actually the big thing here is these aren't AR glasses, but they are smart glasses. So the key things that they do is, like, I'm wearing these anyway. They have my prescription lenses in, they have transition lenses. So I also use them as my sunglasses. But what's great is I just have audio. Like this is kind of the best and easiest way just to kind of be able to consume audio. I have a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old son, and my 16-year-old pretty much lives most of his life with his AirPods on. And then when he's with us, he has them in transparent mode. And when he's like on the bus or at school, he has them in closed mode. So we've already got to the point where there's a generation who just are permanently used to kind of having audio and then interacting with audio. And actually the mic array and the speakers in this device are phenomenal. So even if you just didn't have like cameras or any AR functionality, then that would be great. And then I think the reason why Meta released these is because they had ambitions towards full augmented glasses, or what they call their Project Orion, which we've been tracking for years. But I think they almost accidentally stumbled because they have big ambitions in AI. They actually realized that the glasses are in a way the most human interface for AI. I could, like you said, I'm using ChatGPT. They have if you're a premium subscriber, you can interact with voice and you're just having a conversation with the AI. I can now do that when I'm walking down the street. If I'm walking to meet a founder, I can say, hey, like, tell me about this company. And I can be, those same things that I'm putting into ChatGPT, I could just ask through voice. Now that's great. I could also do that through headphones, right? So why is glasses also useful? Well, I've got them on all the time, but also these have cameras, right? So I can I can say, hey, Meta, take a photo, or I can just kind of press a button. It will take a photo, and now I can interrogate that photo using AI as well. So I could look at a sign and I can say, hey, what does that tell me? What's even more interesting is now you'll have persistent like video feeds. So I can just be walking around in the outside environment. Now at the moment, it relies me to prompt Meta to do something useful. Like I'm walking down a street and I kind of say, hey, based on what I'm looking at, what can I do? But pretty soon these things will become context aware, right? So pretty soon the AI will understand me, my preferences, where I'm going, what the environment is around me, and it can start contextually just providing me information that I didn't even quite realize that I needed. This is before we've even touched AR. Then, and we have this is, I also have the Snap Spectacles on my desk, and these are now a standalone AR device. Once you then add, even if you just add simple visual augmentation, like if I was able to read that, like if I'm on the tube, I don't want to be talking to ChatGPT, but if I could be, kind of like prompting it and then just reading the readout of it, or if I'm walking to a new location that I don't know where I am, just having a single color left or right in my field of vision is killer. Or imagine I'm doing a Skype call, not Skype calls anymore, a Zoom call, and I just have Zoom up in my thing on my kind of like 2D peripheral. And this is just, we're already like, some people wonder, well, is this going to be socially acceptable? But why is it sociably acceptable to be walking down the pavement, like looking at my phone? I'm bumping into people in crowds. I'm not interacting at the dinner table. So if we can get out of our phones, like, there's been lots of experimentation with like the humane wearable and things like that. But I think actually, when you think about it, the glasses form factor is probably the most human and the most natural device to center some of these kind of digitally augmented superpowers around.
On the day-to-day, how many prompts do you have to your glasses?
So I'm usually asking it very simple things. And it's funny because in Europe at the moment, a lot of the most powerful AI features, thanks to the lovely regulation we have here in Europe, a lot of the AI features are still only available to the US. But yeah, I'm using the glasses like most of my waking days. There's still some, if I go out for drinks to the pub, I don't take it because there's still I think there is still a question about the whether society accepts people having cameras on their face. I think that's still one thing to be tested, and it will be tested later this year when Meta release the next version. But yeah, I would say I'm probably using the AI functionality only maybe like 2 or 3 times a day, but I am doing like a lot of my calls and a lot of my like listening to podcasts directly on the device. So it's already providing utility, and then we can get it out of the box. And I think that's why, like, a lot of people say, when is the iPhone moment for something like VR? I think the challenge with VR so far has been that you need a really good reason to put like a fairly heavy thing on your face. And there are lots of really good reasons to do it, but like, it hasn't got that, like with the glasses form factor, this is a device I'm already used to using on a day-to-day basis. It's already worth spending 300 euros on these glasses just for the audio. And now we can start to build functionality on top of that.
I have to say, I am personally most excited about the future that seems to be quite close around the corner, especially considering if you put on glasses that are able to capture everything you do and see during a day. And then for me to be able to do a wrap-up conversation the last 10 minutes of the day, to say, tell me, based on today, what should be the things I have followed up on and made sure actually happened based on today. Because I think we have so many conversations during a day where there are incredibly powerful follow-ups or actions to be taken, but we just don't get around to doing them. And when you then match that with, if you, as an example, do it end of day, and you then say, all right, please write up the to-dos for me in the morning for me to start tomorrow with. Like, that would be so powerful. And I see no reason why some AI that had been fed my inbox, fed my WhatsApps, plus also what I experienced during the day, it would very quickly be a much better Andreas than I am.
Exactly. And, I mean, one thing to be clear, I think if you look at the portfolio of just over 30 companies we built in Fund 1, actually, if I count the number of companies that are pure play AR and VR, it's still probably 3 or 4, right? You can count them on one hand. And those have been in bets like with VR, like we've made a bet in gaming. I think most of our bets in Fund One in this space have been more like, what are the kind of stages? Like, what are the developer tools? Like I was saying earlier, what are the picks and shovels that the platforms need to bring these ambitions like closer to market? What are the developer tools that developers are going to need to actually build these? These are very complicated like applications that we're talking about that kind of understand the real world and can blend your digital world with it. I think when I talk about our thesis, people maybe meet it with a little bit of skepticism, but this is a future that now, like the 5-6 big companies like NVIDIA, Google just released Android XR, Apple released Vision Pro, which is more of a long-term project over the next 5 to 10 years. Like Meta are there, like Samsung are coming back into the market. So again, this surface area, I think there's still lots of questions around what is the startup opportunity on the application side. But yeah, when it emerges, we're going to be there and be getting to those entrepreneurs first.
I think this is the perfect pivot into talking about something you spoke about earlier as well, which is, of course, the criticality of timing. Timing is absolutely crucial in venture. You started out saying, well, when I was at HTC, maybe we were a little bit early. It was more for strategic reasons than it was financials. Tell me, how do you think about timing risk today?
Yeah, a really good question. I mean, I think the first thing is the example I gave earlier of wave optics, understanding where we are in the technology cycle and understanding kind of where the value is. I think that is the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, we're a relatively small fund. I think as a smaller fund, we definitely have more appetite for companies that may end up becoming M&A targets. So in the case of Wave Optics, if you're a pre-seed investor and maybe you've got like, 4 or 5% at exit for a 20, 30 million fund, like that's going to return the fund and then some. So I think we also have to think about, okay, if this is more of a kind of component where there's going to be an M&A path with one of the bigger tech platforms, just making sure that we have the right economics and that we're in at the right time. So that's why we really focus on this kind of day zero investing. And then we also have to think about like, what are the opportunities where, okay, there is a startup opportunity here, but could Apple just build this themselves? It's a bit of a cliche. Like most companies, one obvious VC question is like, oh, will Google build this? But it is, we've certainly seen companies pitch us, things around like kind of, generative AI or kind of the visual side of that, where, they'll pitch us this amazing application, but then actually it turns out that that's something that like Meta or Snap or whoever it is want to do in-house because it's more of a core application. So yeah, definitely challenges around that. But I think, again, that's why you kind of need to be specialist in this space, because that's quite a nuanced discussion to have with a founder. You can't just suddenly say, hey, maybe we should add some AR companies to our portfolio, because you need to understand how to navigate that type of risk.
In your notes for the conversation, you had a statement that said that most founders are living 6 months in the future. We're sometimes living 6 to 12 months in the future. I'd love for you to unpack that, because I think there's something very important in that.
Yeah, so I think all of the great founders, there's a certain element for them. They've seen something wrong in the world, or they've seen a future opportunity in the world, right? So most of the founders we work with are more in the kind of, they've seen the opportunity. The really great example is someone like, Justin Can, who built Justin TV. That turned into Twitch and then became a really huge acquisition from Amazon. And if you hear his early investors say, well, like Justin TV started out as this crazy guy who had like a live streaming video and he was just doing like live blogging, because he knew that cameras plus a 4G connection suddenly made a new behavior possible, right? So he was living in the future, and his investors weren't betting on that crazy idea. They were betting that there's a set of technologies which is going to unlock a huge opportunity. So they're willing to back the vision of that future. So I think a key part of our role is kind of meeting our founders where they are by being slightly ahead and thinking what the next thing is. And you've got to remember, if we're investing at day zero, there's probably only certain technical milestones that they need to hit in 12 to 18 months time. But then they need to think, okay, well, the next round, I'm going to need consumer traction or enterprise traction. So we're already kind of like looking maybe 24 months into the future to see where that's going to be. And then as a fund, we're also convincing LPs that actually this is a really great area to be allocating capital in. we still firmly believe that, there's a huge amount of value to still be extracted from the mobile era, from the B2B SaaS era, but those playbooks are very well run. If you're a new fund, like trying to get alpha in the, the B2B SaaS space is going to be very hard. That's going to be competed away. Whereas like we're saying, no, actually there is going to be like trillions of dollars of new value, new disruption that's happening to the existing players. So we have to paint a picture of why, okay, this is a trend that plays out over kind of 10 years. And you need to invest in us because we're investing in these companies, and that's where the alpha is. So yeah, so it's always this kind of constant tension of being realistic about where the market is today, and then being able to try to explain the future a little bit.
I got to ask you why. So you're saying 6 months in the future for founders and 6 to 12 for you. I am always thinking much more. So just to like, I would be thinking 10 years in the future, right? That's the usual thing you hear. So why the 6 months and 6 to 12 months benchmarks here? Or
yeah, I think it's to do with like milestones of the product they're building, yes, and then the milestones of the funding rounds that they've got to meet. So in 6 months' time, I need an MVP. In another 6 months' time, I need X kind of trial users using it, and kind of so on and so forth. So yeah, I think the number of months is probably kind of, yeah, that's maybe arbitrary, but yeah, there's definitely, you need to be thinking about that short-term horizon as well as the long-term horizon, and kind of like blending the two. There is this really good, there's I think you pronounce it called Amara's law, or maybe it's Amara's law, but it's the law around like humans are typically like kind of, it's overestimating the short term, but drastically underestimating the long term, right? So that's something that's kind of, that law is always at the top of my head when I'm looking at these things. What we've seen in this space, unfortunately, people see the opportunity, people get incredibly excited about it. Like the VCs move in packs to meet that opportunity, and then it fades away. But actually, usually the original thing was right, and it was just about like, where in that cycle did you want to be playing to suit your own strengths.
Dave, we only have 5 minutes left. And for that reason, I want to rush to ask you something, which is within this thesis area of the next era of computing, what locations, what hotspots are there in Europe that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I mean, the first question is just like, we focus on Europe. We have some US companies, but they typically have then ties or engineering or product teams here in Europe. But I think the first question to ask is like, why focus on Europe? Why not focus globally or just in the US? And I think for FOV, we want to be like that first fund where there hadn't been those first funds, that kind of day zero conviction ticket. And I think also, if you look at the kind of the M&A trails of all of the big players that I've mentioned, so Apple are investing billions, Meta are investing billions, like Snap is investing heavily, NVIDIA is now starting to acquire more companies. If you look at the M&A trails, a non-insignificant number of those companies have been companies that have started in Europe and then sold onwards. So now, obviously, we'd love for those exits to be big exits. And I think there also needs to be a path for those companies in Europe, not just to feel like, oh yeah, this is my destiny, I'm going to sell to a big player. We also want to invest in, companies that will be the next kind of NVIDIAs or OpenAIs or whatever it is. When I zoom in and look, okay, well, whereabouts in Europe, I think that there probably is a couple of like hotspots. So my partner Petri is based in Helsinki. If you think about Helsinki, the amount of talent density it has is insane. It definitely punches above its weight and is maybe slightly overlooked by, other players in Europe, but it has all of the Nokia legacy. So people who are building at the kind of the frontier of connectivity, like, 5G and 6G, but also the old smartphone, people who are working on that and coming onto the next generation. You also have gaming, like think about companies like Supercell. We have a number of both co-investors and LPs that have spent most of their time in gaming. But actually, if you think about gaming, like gaming has really been the kind of the playground for AI. It's been the playground for VR. It's where some of these early technologies get a hold first. If you think about NVIDIA was a gaming company, right? They were making GPUs so that people could play, like 3D games. So Helsinki is definitely punching above its weight. We have a number of companies based there. the next like obvious places, I guess, I was just last week visiting a portfolio company in Zurich. If you think about Switzerland, just some of the talent there, like ETH Zurich has some of the greatest like computer vision talent. It has some of the greatest robotics. I think it has like one of the world-class robotics like departments. As soon as we see a deck that has ETH kind of talent on it, it definitely kind of makes us pay attention. And I think there is more of an entrepreneurial spirit, like more people willing to back those companies. And I think this is still a slight problem, but like those companies sometimes still have to think about spinning out of those institutions. And it's been great to see a little bit of progress, if not as much as we'd like. Other areas, I think like just France, I mean, obviously AI is kind of an obvious one for France, but actually if you think about some of its other industries, you have all of the kind of 3D and engineering talent that comes out of the south of France, like clustered around big companies like Airbus, where some of these disciplines have been crucial. And then think about Germany as well. So maybe not necessarily, I think on the content and the application side, maybe in Berlin, but actually we spend a lot of our time looking at the talent clustered around Munich. I think the automotive industry was some of the first to really kind of get into like the aspects of how 3D VR digital twins could really revolutionize not just the way that they make cars, but also the way their teams collaborate around that process, and then also the selling of those things. And there is just a high density of talent in some of the kind of underlying technologies for our thesis there. So, but yeah, it's Europe wide, but I would say those are the places that we've mostly invested in. Is kind of, I haven't talked about UK yet, but you have some amazing talent in UK, obviously. But yeah, UK, Finland, Germany, France, and the Nordic countries as well, generally.
Dave, I'm so happy that I made it to ask that last question, because I think it was so clear from that why it's so powerful to be a specialist in Europe specifically, because we have so many hotspots everywhere. Be that now, in this case, it's next generation computing, could also be pure robotics, or it could be gaming. It's so important that if you are building a small fund like yours that's specialist within one space, that you're also recognized across these ecosystems. And you don't do that very simply. It really comes from having been in this space for a long time. So I'm really happy that we made it to cover that last bit, because I really think it underscores the importance of being a specialist here in Europe, maybe even in comparison to the US, more important here. I think so, at least. Dave, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, hopefully it made for an interesting topic. And yeah, happy to dive more into these topics if there's investors that are just kind of looking into them or doing active deals. Yeah, very collaborative, looking for more people to do these deals with.
You're the best, Dave. Thank you, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. Discover where operational expertise meets innovation. With end-to-end coverage across fund admin, tax, accounting, compliance, ESG, and more, we take care of the complexities so you can focus on what matters most. Whether it's supporting visionaries or maximizing returns for your LPs, our tech-driven and comprehensive solutions empower you to achieve your goals with confidence. Partner with ACE Alternatives to streamline your operations and elevate your fund success.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.